Okay, so there's obviously quite a lot riding on this game for BioWare, and already I'm getting some pretty bad vibes. So just to explain, the early Dragon Age titles were all dark fantasy games, and there was a fair amount of concern when we got news that the lead writers have all but left BioWare. I think seeing this trailer has now validated those concerns, as it's pretty obvious that the team is going for a more Critical Role style light-hearted Dungeons & Dragons cast, where all the hateful rhetoric, social discrimination, and politics in general have been stripped out to make way for an all-friendly cast who gets along with each other and who all has one or two personality quirks. Now, this is a big problem for any Dragon Age fan who was hoping for a dark fantasy story, because you need the politics to establish conflict, both within the world and among your party members. That way, the protagonist can act as an ambassador to all these rumbling factions by learning about their grievances and finding a way to resolve them in the third act. Like, I look at this trailer and straight away I can tell that these writers are gonna have a hell of a time setting up any meaningful conflict diet between the main cast. Like, if all of this ends up being just another "we need to stop a big bad guy before he destroys the world," then I'm pretty sure we can write off BioWare as a competent developer going forward. Hope I'm wrong, but these are definitely worrying early impressions. Hello and welcome to another special episode where I cover some of the most bizarre failures in gaming history. This episode will be talking about BioWare, specifically their latest release, that is Dragon Age the Veilguard. A game that has been the center of significant criticism for quite a long list of reasons, but today I will only be focusing on the main issues that has been bothering me personally. And hopefully I will do a decent job in being as fair as possible. So with all that said, let's get right to it. So the first issue I want to talk about is the tone. For you see, Veilguard had opted to go for a more light-hearted, "hey friends, let's all go stop the big bad guy before he destroys the world" kind of plot. Whereas the early Dragon Age games, that is Origins, Awakening, and Dragon Age 2, were all deeply rooted in dark fantasy, with the writers putting a premium on exploring extremely mature themes like social inequality, collective punishment, or racism, which is ultimately the point of the dark fantasy genre. Like, yes, there was a big bad guy at the end for us to confront, but that was really just a plot device used to get us to explore the world. The real substance of those games was in dealing with political conflicts within the story. This is of course what we call world building, a pretty basic feature of role-playing games. And just to give a bit of context for any new players to the franchise, one example of a major conflict established in Origins is the policy on magic. For you see, in the Dragon Age universe, magic users are considered to be dangerous, because there's a non-zero risk that a demon could possess them, especially if they're young or poorly trained, and consequently murder a horrific number of innocent people. So the way society addresses this issue is by separating anyone attuned with magic from their families at a young age and locking them in a glorified prison for the rest of their lives, which needless to say is a controversial policy. After all, is it fair to collectively punish every single magic user when the vast majority have never done anything wrong in their entire lives? Of course not. And there are plenty of reasonable arguments against this position. However, at the same time, you also have plenty of rational arguments in favor for it, because it is also not fair for hundreds of innocent families to pay the ultimate price just because one person made a mistake. And here is the real genius of this conflict. There is no meaningful solution to this problem. Like, yes, you can temporarily call for a truce, but at the end of the day, somebody is getting the short end of the stick. And so the door is always open for some future incident to cause a major escalation, which will once again call for the player to step into the shoes of their character. This is how you set up a role-playing game, by giving your players interesting choices that both dictate how the story takes shape as well as reflect on their own character. And this is also what made the earlier Dragon Age games unique. Now, I'm sure you're asking, what kind of themes do Veilguard explore? Well, the answer is simple. Nothing. All this game has to offer is just a go stop a big bad guy plot, and everything you do in between is essentially filler quests designed to level up. The very thing that made this series special has been replaced with another generic Marvel movie plot, so it's not a big surprise that many fans are upset by this truly unimaginative story direction. And just before I move on to my next point, I should point out that it's completely possible, and in my opinion very likely, that the reason why the tone in this game was so watered down was simply because the writers were either uncomfortable or too inexperienced at writing a story that deals with the darker themes of the earlier titles. Now, if this is the case, then you only have two smart choices. Either you create a new IP entirely and market your game towards an audience that appreciates the lighter tone, or you hire somebody who is more adept at writing dark fantasy stories and let them take the lead on the project. And just to touch on that second option, it takes a very mature person to produce a compelling story involving complex social issues. Like, you really want an open-minded person who is willing to listen to arguments coming from the opposite side, while also confident enough to defend their own talking points. And unfortunately, that can be a rare find in the current political climate. Now, does that imply the current BioWare team is perhaps too immature to write a compelling story that explores difficult topics because nobody on the team has ever interacted with anybody outside of their echo chamber? Well, I don't know. I'll leave you to decide that, my dear viewer. But the answer is yes. Let's move on and talk about the second glaring problem, which is the characters. Now, what elevated the writing in the early Dragon Age games was the fact that every character followed their own unique set of ideology and principles, and in some cases even acted as an ambassador to their respective factions. Like, you have people ranging from Morrigan, who was very much a might makes right kind of person, to someone like Alistair, who was this lawful Templar with a strict code of conduct. You also have characters like Zevran, who was an ends justify the means, self-interested blade for hire, who is completely contrasted by people like Sten, who puts honor and duty to the state above anything else. The point is, you are blessed in having a cast with a truly diverse set of opinions throughout the entire story. It really feels like a classic Star Trek episode where every member would each offer their own personal advice on any given situation, meaning that players can have very different experiences depending on who they brought along. But more importantly, it also means that it's impossible to appease everyone in the group, which is a wonderful thing because it means your relationship with certain characters can be strengthened or even tested depending on your choices throughout the story. It adds weight to your decisions and it makes your party members more memorable. Now, compare this to what we have in Veilguard, where every team member shares the same "let's all be the heroes together and save the day" kind of attitude. And all the player choices are limited down to just agreeing with them to various degrees of politeness. You are not testing the strength of the bond you have with them, nor are you testing their resolve or their principles or anything significant about their character. And so ultimately your dialogue options are completely meaningless. And this is a symptom of a writer who doesn't know how to incorporate the player into their story. And I'm sure some of you have played Dungeons & Dragons before with a certain bad dungeon master who doesn't care about your character's backstory or motivations and just wants you to fight his favorite monsters all day. Sounds familiar? Well, that's exactly what Veilguard was like. And it only gets worse with the romance options. Like, I don't want to make assumptions about people's personal lives, but has anyone on the BioWare team ever been in a real relationship? Like, the chemistry here was completely inanimate. It basically just boiled down to keep selecting the heart dialogue option until you kiss. And since you're allowed to romance anybody, you could literally hit on everybody in the group with no consequences. There should be at least some tension among the group, if not jealousy. Like, I find it hard to believe that the creative director would prefer having 7 completely bland and meaningless romance options as opposed to a single well-written dynamic relationship in which players can empathize with. Frankly, I would have taken Hawk's romance with Isabella any day of the week over the nonsense in Veilguard. And look, I get that other games are guilty of this problem as well. But the writing and specifically the characters was the only thing that BioWare excelled at. No serious person looks at the Mass Effect or Dragon Age series and felt impressed by the technical side of things. All BioWare really had going for them was the writing. But now even people like me are schooling them at what they're supposed to be best at. Talk about a cataclysmic fall from grace. Like, I could mention characters such as Garrus or Tali or Morrigan to an illiterate Neanderthal, and they could talk my ears off all day on those characters. But if somebody held a gun to my head and asked me to recall the names of anybody in Veilguard, I wouldn't bet the house on me getting more than 1 or 2. Now let's wrap things up by talking about the politics surrounding this game. Specifically, a growing industry trend, that of course being companies pretending to be progressive by pandering towards the LGBTQ community. And I'm gonna cut right to the chase. Your characters do not automatically become more compelling or interesting just because they're LGBTQ or if they're using a certain pronoun. Nor does it make your game more inclusive or progressive. Progressive ideology is about accepting the fact that the world is filled with different ideas, cultures, and beliefs, and that there is room for everybody to exist. That is what it means to be inclusive. It is not about pushing your ideology onto other people. And let's just be very clear about something. BioWare is not progressive. This is a company with a documented track record of mistreating their own staff with horrible company policies resulting in mental abuse, toxic work culture, and torturous periods of development crunch time. Or as the execs prefer to call it, BioWare magic! It is also a company that goes out of its way to silence out criticism by selectively handing out review copies to outlets that are more likely to promote your game in a positive light. which is objectively just a dishonest anti-consumer practice. This is a classic case of a AAA company pretending to be progressive via the lowest common denominator, and they are not fooling me at all. But I really wish other progressives would start to wake up from all this nonsense. Like, I was at Taipei earlier this year catching up with some family friends, and I asked them about the elections in Taiwan, which to no real surprise, since all my friends and I are progressive, they all told me they'll be voting for the DPP, the Democratic Progressive Party, because of their stance on LGBTQ issues. Now, I pressed them on some of the DPP's other policies, and it became very obvious that this was the most pro-corporate crony capitalist party in the system, because they are essentially trying to turn Taiwan into like a Japan, where the big tech companies practically run the place. Like, who cares if you get to call yourself a she instead of a he when you are a slave to your employer? And some of my friends became red with embarrassment because I had unintentionally exposed them as just a bunch of political simpletons who are only capable of reading labels. It was really quite a shocking experience because my friends and I are all millennials in our late 20s and early 30s. Like, come on, we're supposed to be grown adults here. We should be more sophisticated than this. So, get your shit together. Anyway, sorry for the tangent. Back to BioWare politics. So with regards to DEI in video games, I personally am not bothered by it as long as it doesn't get in the way of the story or the setting. Now, of course, this is coming from a progressive mindset, so I understand if a more conservative player disagrees with me, and they are entitled to their opinions. But let's all play devil's advocate for a moment. Like, I am a cisgender straight man. My choices in role-playing games are going to reflect that. But if a transgender player makes a different set of choices to me in their playthrough, well, I just don't see how that affects my time with the game in any meaningful way, and so there's just no reason to be upset at it. Now, to be fair, I will provide an example of a situation where a creative decision would be harmful to my experience. Let's say, hypothetically, we have a Chronari party member in the game who demands that we address them by a specific pronoun because they identify as non-binary. Now, this will be a problem, because the Chronari in Dragon Age are a warrior culture who puts their duty to the state above all their personal needs. This is something that is unique to their culture, and unless a writer can come up with some intelligent reason to justify this creative choice, then they're actively breaking my immersion in the game. This would be an example where DEI politics has gotten in the way of telling the story, and would be deserving of any criticism directed against it. But again, just to play devil's advocate, let's say I am a hypothetical homosexual man and I am playing a gay man in a role-playing game. I don't need a straight NPC to turn gay or someone to change their gender just so I can romance them. Like, no, you're not excluding me from your game just because a certain character isn't attracted to me. And other people don't have to change just to suit my needs. Like, what do you think I am, a narcissist? Again, progressive ideology is about accepting that the world is full of different people. It's not about changing others to meet your own needs. And just as a final note before I close this video, it should be pointed out that I am not telling people to boycott this game. Everybody is different and can make their own choices. I will, however, offer some sensible consumer advice, and that is just be patient. Don't rush in and pre-order this game or buy on day one, but rather wait a couple of weeks. Wait until there's a more consolidated review score and maybe even check up on a few Twitch streams to see if this game is your cup of tea before making your purchase. I will say for me personally, this game will serve as a fun little instrument to see which content creator is on the take, because obviously we already know that games journalism these days pretty much only exists to serve as marketing for publishers, but I'm pretty sure online content creators are also moving into that role. So yeah, it'll definitely be fun to see who's in the pockets of EA and BioWare over the next couple of months. Anyway, that's me. Leave a comment, let me know your thoughts on the topic. Thanks for watching.